A man stumbles through the front door, and he's definitely wounded. He calls for help, but no one answers. He says that his wife needs help, but after a moment, he cries out in pain. Later, we see Mikey and Kylie messing around in the woods, and she tells him that she doesn't want to go home now. As they walk through the woods, he tells her that he's there to visit Joe, since he hasn't been able to see him much since he enlisted. Back at the car, Stu and Joe talk about how Joe actually likes Kylie, and he swears that he'll tell her when he's ready. Just then, Sonia pops up to see if Joe is doing okay, and after Joe opens up about how he has a past in the army he wants to talk about, Mikey and Kylie pop up to surprise him. Now that the gang's all here, they hit the road. As they drive down the country road, everything seems to be deserted, and they even pass an abandoned RV. Eventually, Joe stops to look at the map to find gas, and the girls take a bathroom break. They also mention that these 2 weeks are going to be amazing. Then, Stu gets out of the car to point out that they're out of gas on top of being lost. While they look at the map, Mikey spots a piece of land that might be a farm, and they agree that it might be their best chance. As they continue, the tension between Mikey and Stu grows, and Joe brings up the past with Stu too. Eventually, they come across an abandoned car, and there's blood all over it. They decide to keep going until they can find a phone, and they try to brainstorm some ideas on what happened back there. Finally, they reach a gas station, and Joe leaves everyone in the car. He can't find a single soul outside, so he heads inside next. Back at the car, Mikey wants to know why Stu can't cut Joe a break, and Stu thinks this is a good idea to mention that Joe is actually going AWOL. Back inside, Joe looks around, but all he finds is blood and furniture overturned. Just as Joe leaves the house, Stu gets out of the car to go for a walk, and Mikey asks Joe about going AWOL. Joe is more concerned with whatever happened inside the house, but Stu manages to stumble upon an empty barn before Joe calls him back to the car. Mikey starts looking around for some gas, and Joe heads back inside to call the police about the abandoned car in the house. Finally, Joe gets a hold of the police, but they tell him that they can't help him. The operator warns him to board up his house and to stay inside, and she eventually tells him that everyone is dead. On Stu's way back to the car, he passes another car, and he thinks that someone is inside. When he goes to help the woman, she bites his neck, and he falls to the ground as everyone makes it over to help. After Stu dies, a crew of zombies shuffle out of the barn towards them, but it's only after Stu comes back as a zombie that they book it for the house. Mikey manages to punch Stu before running away, but we find out that he cuts his hand on Stu's tooth before getting away. Once inside, Joe tells the others what the 911 operator said earlier, but they're interrupted when a zombie wakes up in the bedroom. Suddenly, an RV pulls up outside while Sonia grabs a knife from the kitchen. The crew gets excited about the newcomers, but Stu starts attacking the RV. Joe decides that he's going to run outside to help the RV, and he leads Stu away while Mikey has the survivors come inside. Once inside, they introduce themselves as Gary and Rebecca, and Gary mentions that one of the fast ones bit him earlier. Kylie asks them what happened the last 2 weeks that they've been camping, but Gary goes to handle the zombie from the bedroom first. Joe, on the other hand, runs all the way back to the barn, and he waits to see if Stu is still chasing him. Back at the house, Gary mentions that they still aren't safe inside, and he gives him a weapon before he runs out to find Joe. Out at the barn, Stu shows up, and Joe fights him. When Mikey leaves to help Joe, Sonia tries to see where Gary and Rebecca came from. Gary mentions that they came from the city. Mikey manages to make it to the barn, but when he goes to shoot Stu, he finds out that the gun is actually empty. Stu starts eating him alive, but Joe finishes him off with a pickaxe. Back at the house, Gary starts getting really handsy with the girls, and he even strikes Rebecca when she stands up for Kylie. Outside, Mikey isn't doing too well, but Joe isn't giving up on him. At the house, Sonia tells Gary that he'll be sorry when the guys get back, but he points out that he gave Mikey an empty gun. The more Rebecca stands up for the girls, the more he punishes her. When Gary gets distracted by Kylie's yelling, Sonia attacks him with her weapon, and the threat of Gary is over. Back outside, Joe tries to get Mikey to focus, but suddenly, a whole bunch of runners start sprinting their way. Mikey tells Joe to leave him here, and Joe makes a break for the car with the zombie. Once inside, he locks the door and remembers what he's locked in there with. At the house, Rebecca lets her aggression out on Gary's body, and she tells the other girls about how she ended up with Gary. Then, Rebecca notices Gary's hand moving, and they don't understand how he's coming back since he doesn't have a pulse. Zombie Gary bites Rebecca, and he manages to get Kylie too. Sonia manages to get to the bedroom where she keeps him out for the time being, but that will only last for so long. Suddenly, Gary breaks in, and Sonia hides behind the door. Outside, Joe pushes his way out of the car, and he sprints for the house with zombies on his tail. He almost makes it to the door, but a zombie cuts him off. As he runs around the other side of the house, Gary gives up looking for Sonia in the room, and he goes back to eating Kylie. Sonia moves to the bathroom, where she cowers in the corner crying, and Joe manages to get in the house through the back door. Once inside, he notices Gary eating Kylie, and he uses Gary's weapon to take out all 3 zombies. The other zombies burst into the house, and he hides in the bathroom where Sonia goes to meet him. Joe manages to jump behind the bed in time, but Sonia isn't so lucky. The zombies start eating her. Joe fights off the one zombie that noticed him. Outside, a helicopter passes by, and the zombies rush outside to chase it. Joe goes to take care of Sonia, but it's too late for her. He leaves her to go get help, but as he walks into the living room, he hears some guys outside shooting the zombies. When he opens the door, he comes face to face with one of them, but a zombie eats him while Joe closes the door back. He slowly walks around the house in a defeated way, and he slumps down to the ground in front of the refrigerator. Just then, a man named Billy sneaks in and holds a weapon to Joe after Joe puts his own down. Billy starts telling Joe that this is his house, and he blames Joe for his daily dying to the zombies. Joe apologizes, but he tries to explain that the 2 of them could come out of this in one piece. Billy thinks that there's no way to make it through, but Joe points out that the woman in the car who had already died as a zombie without anyone attacking her. Joe tries to explain that there's an expiration date for the zombies, but Billy isn't listening. Just as Billy goes to finish Joe, zombie Sonia attacks him, and she turns to Joe next. Joe has to put her down, and he goes over to Billy next. Billy tells him that he doesn't want to turn into a zombie, and he asks Joe to help him since he's been bit. Joe does him the kindness of taking care of him while he's still a human, and he grabs the keys to the gas pump from beside Billy. Joe heads to the kitchen to try and wash some of the blood from his hands, and he heads outside to sneak his way to the gas pump. He manages to pump a good bit of gas, but he's attacked by a couple of zombies before he gets too much. After taking care of them, he goes back to pumping his gas, and he fills the car up. Then, Joe hops in the car and starts it up. As he gets ready to leave, he notices a woman with her child over at the barn, and he starts to realize that it's his duty as a good human being to help her. He busts the gate wide open, and he heads over to the barn to distract the other zombies. He makes it to Sandy, and he tells her to hide somewhere. Then, he turns around and tells her that he has a car that they can get away in. But after he gets attacked by another zombie, he has her hide in the barn with him. Suddenly, a bunch of runners sprint by, but the only issue is the one sleeper on the ground. Joe makes light work of her, and he tells Sandy a plan where he distracts the zombies so she can make it to his car. Sandy mentions that they'll come back for him in a minute, but he tells her to just take the car if she can't find him. Joe saunters out to the zombies and leads them further from the car. Sandy grabs her child and heads to the car, and after Joe hears the car doors, he starts fighting off a horde of zombies. They overwhelm him though, and he decides to take them all out with one shot to the gas tank. Later, survivors manage to make it to the gas station, and one of them is bitten. While the girl bandages the guy's bitten hand, the other guy decides he's going to make a break for the house. They all end up running for the house, and they find the grisly scenes throughout the house. In the end, the girl gets bit, and that's par for the course with this film. For an unknown zombie movie, it managed to get more zombie rules right than half of Hollywood, and the soundtrack is a banger too. And that wraps up this recap. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this recap, please subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss a single video.